These two have sold their souls, and they've sold Harry's family down the river. It's unforgivable, and it will leave a bitter taste in the mouths of millions of people. So we can hear from those PAs, who I know at least one of them was regularly reduced to tears by the bullying from Meghan Markle. And if Meghan doesn't think she did bully, of course she can sue me, because I've said it now.
So Meghan Markle is trending again. But don't get it twisted. This isn't one of those fluffy, Duchess inspires millions stories. This isn't about a new show, a heartfelt interview, or some grand speech on motherhood. No, this is something else entirely. This time, Meghan has found herself in the center of a full-blown media disaster, one that she accidentally lit the match for. It all started with one Instagram video. She probably thought it would go viral in the empowering, heartwarming kind of way. You know, the kind of content that garners praise for being brave and relatable. But that's not what happened. Not even close. What landed on people's screens was bizarre. Meghan, heavily pregnant, or at least appearing to be, dancing in a hospital room. The energy? Off. The mood? Confusing. The vibe? Somewhere between awkward and straight up try hard. The internet didn't laugh with her. It cringed. Hard. And before we go any further, if you've ever watched a public image implode in real time and couldn't look away, you're going to want to subscribe. Because this rabbit hole, it only gets deeper from here. Within hours, that video spiraled into chaos. Instead of sparking joy, it triggered a collective wave of secondhand embarrassment. The baby bump looked strange. The dance was uncomfortable, and the internet, as always, was merciless. But what really set this whole thing ablaze wasn't just the video, it was the timing. Meghan had been walking a tightrope with her public image, and this was the final wobble that sent everything tumbling. And then came the studios. Netflix, where Meghan had released her With Love Meghan docuseries, suddenly found itself caught in the storm. Greg Peters, the co-CEO, was reportedly livid. Insiders say he was demanding an emergency strategy meeting to figure out how to separate the platform's name from this bizarre circus act. Even Ted Sarandos, who's been notably sympathetic toward Meghan, wasn't thrilled. Sources close to the situation say he began second-guessing whether continuing their partnership was worth the backlash. Meanwhile, Paramount didn't wait to make a decision. They cut ties, clean, no press release, no drama. Just one day, Meghan was in talks, the next, radio silence. And it wasn't just them. Other studios began ghosting her, pulling out of negotiations, canceling meetings, avoiding being caught. In the growing tornado that was Meghan's collapsing credibility, the media narrative started shifting. Headlines weren't asking, what will Meghan do next? They were now asking, what went wrong? And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just a bad PR moment. This was a full-on reputation crisis. Her career, or whatever was left of it, was entering meltdown mode. But Meghan being Meghan, she didn't retreat. She didn't pause. She doubled down. In the middle of the chaos, she released a statement. She claimed the video was about proving herself. She said she wanted the world to know that motherhood hadn't taken away her humor, her identity, or her message. She said the video was supposed to show that she was still fun, still relevant, still someone to be heard. And sure, that sounds noble. But here's the problem. Just because you say something with conviction doesn't mean people will buy it. The internet saw something else entirely. They saw someone desperate to be quirky, desperate to be adored, desperate to be seen as relatable, yet failing on every front. Instead of connecting with people, it alienated them. Instead of being empowering, it felt self-absorbed. And instead of being lighthearted, it came off as tone-deaf. Even her most loyal fans, those who used to defend her every move, began to pause. Comment sections that once overflowed with support were now full of confusion, disbelief, and in many cases, brutal honesty. And it only got worse from there. Netflix, already under pressure from content controversies and performance issues, found itself in a PR tailspin it hadn't anticipated. With Love Meghan was supposed to be a long-term bet, a soft-focused docuseries designed to showcase Meghan's voice, her brand, her supposed authenticity. But the numbers didn't lie. Internally, test screenings for Season 2 were a disaster. Viewers described the episodes as hollow, self-indulgent, and even unwatchable. That's not the kind of feedback any streaming giant wants attached to a multi-million-dollar project. And the worst part? Even her fans weren't impressed. When your core base, the people who stuck by you through royal family drama, public feuds, and awkward interviews, start jumping ship, that's more than a red flag. That's the iceberg. And Meghan's ship. He was steering straight into it. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling even faster. Greg Peters wanted out. He was done. Internally, he was rallying the board to pull the plug, cancel season 2, stop promotion, distance the platform from the disaster before it dragged Netflix down with it. But it wasn't so simple. Ted Sarandos, who had been one of Meghan's biggest champions at Netflix, was reportedly digging in his heels. No one fully understands why. Some chalk it up to loyalty, others to deeper connections. But he wasn't ready to pull the trigger. That created a split in the boardroom. On one side, executives warning that continuing the Meghan Markle experiment was business suicide. On the other, a small handful still clinging to the hope that public opinion might shift. Spoiler alert, it didn't. While executives debated, Meghan moved into full damage control mode. But instead of laying low, hiring a PR firm, or doing a carefully curated interview, she took the mic. Literally, she recorded a solo podcast episode. No interviewer, no co-host. Just Meghan and a microphone for nearly an hour. If the goal was to humanize herself and clarify the intentions behind the video, it didn't work. In fact, it backfired spectacularly. The entire episode came off like a monologue delivered by someone trying to sound deep and profound, but landing somewhere between confused and bizarre. She even referred to herself in the third person. The world hasn't seen the real Meghan yet, she declared, as if teeing up a redemption arc that no one asked for. Instead of self-awareness, what audiences heard was defensiveness. Instead of humility, there was an almost theatrical victimhood. She talked about how the media misrepresents her, how critics don't understand her mission, how she's been misunderstood from day one. And maybe there was a time when people would have bought that narrative. But not anymore. Not after everything, and certainly not when you're speaking from a gated estate in Montecito with a team of nannies, chefs, and stylists at your disposal, while pretending to be just another overwhelmed mom figuring it out like the rest of us. That disconnect? It's fatal for public trust. While Meghan leaned deeper into her personal truth, the public was tuning out. Loudly. Social media, once her greatest amplifier, had turned. Where there were once heart emojis and queen energy, there were now rolling eyes, memes, and long comment threads breaking down every inconsistency. Even influencers who built their platforms on supporting Meghan started quietly deleting posts, distancing themselves, rebranding overnight. But perhaps the biggest blow wasn't the internet. It was Hollywood. Word began to spread that Meghan was pitching new projects. The tension inside Netflix was boiling over. Meghan wasn't just staying silent and hoping the storm would pass. She was actively pushing forward, demanding that season 2 of With Love, Meghan not only be released, but fully promoted. Even more shocking, she reportedly began lobbying for a third season, despite the fact that season 2 hadn't even premiered and was already getting torched in private screenings. Insiders say she was pulling every string she could find, trying to leverage personal connections and pressuring Ted Sarandos to greenlight the next phase of her brand. Some whispers even suggested that the relationship between Meghan and Sarandos wasn't just professional. The rumor mill caught fire with speculation. No confirmed reports, but enough heat that the boardroom started getting uncomfortable. The board didn't want drama. They wanted distance. Greg Peters, who had by this point reached his limit, was allegedly working around the clock to rally support for an internal exit plan, quietly cancel the show, wipe future promotional campaigns, write off the Meghan Markle experiment as a failed gamble, and move on. From a business perspective, it made perfect sense. The show wasn't performing, the brand had become divisive, and the backlash was costing Netflix more than it was worth. But here's the thing, Meghan wouldn't go quietly. She insisted this was her truth, that she was expressing herself, that critics just didn't get it. She framed the backlash as a reflection of the public's discomfort with strong women speaking up, doubling down on the very narrative that many people were already rejecting, and it only made things worse. Late-night comedians began using her as comedic fodder. The same talk shows that once welcomed her with open arms were now slipping her name into punchlines. Even media outlets that typically defended her were growing quiet. Silent. Absent. When your last line of defense starts backing away, you know you've crossed a line, but Meghan didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did. and just didn't care. In her latest series of public comments, she compared her pregnancy video to a public service announcement. She said her goal was to remind parents, especially mothers, that they could still have fun, still be silly, still dance, even when overwhelmed. She framed it as a message of empowerment. But here's where reality collided with the message. Because while the idea might have been noble, the execution was anything but. To viewers, the video didn't scream empowerment, it screamed privilege. It didn't say we're in this together, it said look at me. It felt less like a message of hope, and more like a desperate attempt to cling to relevance. And that's the word people kept repeating. Desperate. Desperate for attention, desperate for validation, desperate for approval in a world that had already moved on. Even her fiercest supporters couldn't defend the optics. The baby bump that kept shifting shape, the odd positioning, the choreography that seemed so forced it looked like a Saturday Night Live parody gone wrong. Every frame of that video was analyzed, dissected, and memed into oblivion. And as it spread, so did the questions. Was it real? Was it staged? Was it some kind of social experiment? Or was it, like so many people began to suspect, an attempt to provoke sympathy and controversy in equal measure? Whatever the truth was, it didn't work. Because here's the cold reality. Once people start doubting your sincerity, the damage is already done. There's no coming back from that. Not in the world of celebrity branding. Trust is everything. And Meghan Markle's trust bank account was running on fumes. Even with love, Meghan, a project designed to be her crown jewel, was now being treated like a liability. Netflix quietly began dialing back promotional plans. Behind the scenes, Meghan was reportedly making frantic moves. Emails, calls, meetings with agents, anyone who would still listen. Word got out that she was pitching new concepts, trying to rebrand herself again. Lifestyle series, animated children's content, even a possible memoir reframe. But every pitch seemed to come with one major problem. Her name. It had gone from being a talking point to a risk warning. Executives weren't just uninterested, they were afraid. Afraid of the backlash, the bad press, the chaos that followed. Every Meghan Markle headline. She'd become synonymous not with strength or inspiration, but with unpredictability, controversy, and ego. The kind that's impossible to manage once the cameras start rolling. That's not star power. That's a PR liability. The final nail in the coffin? Media silence. Once friendly outlets that used to fawn over her every move had nothing to say. Not a word of defense. Not even a spin attempt. Just empty space. When the press that once built you now treats you like yesterday's problem, it's the clearest sign your moment is over. And yet, Meghan still seems to believe she's in control of the story. In one of her most recent public remarks, she said she wasn't worried about the hate, that she's always been misunderstood, that the world just isn't ready for someone like her. But it's that exact mindset, that refusal to reflect, that's fueling her fall. Because at some point, it's not about being misunderstood. It's about not listening, not reading the room, not realizing that the narrative you've clung to no longer fits the person the world sees. Even as Meghan reportedly pressures Netflix to release season 2 of With Love, Meghan, insiders say the company is actively looking for an exit ramp. Quietly, strategically, so they can cut ties without further damage. Some say they're even considering pulling the show entirely before it airs, choosing to take the loss rather than risk another PR explosion. And Meghan, she's still shouting into the void, still posting, still doubling down, still treating. This like a redemption arc that's about to peak. But the problem is, when the audience leaves the theater, there's no one left to clap. Sometimes, when the public tunes out, they really tune out. And right now, Meghan Markle isn't being silenced, she's being ignored. The final collapse isn't always loud. It's not always scandalous. Sometimes it's just a slow, quiet fade into irrelevance, where the spotlight doesn't turn off. It just moves on. And if you want to stay up to date on where the spotlight moves next, and who might be the next to crack under the pressure, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and stick with us. Because the drama, it's only just beginning.